Jurrian, thanks very much for joining us. It would be good for those who don't know the company just to get an overview of Finch Buildings and also the strategy there.
We've developed a modular building system completely consisted out of solid timber, CLT, glulam. And the strategy is actually not so much to cannibalize on the existing industry, but actually work with them to change the way we build. Because I think the building industry is, of course, as you know, responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions. And I think timber construction needs and deserves scaling up much faster than it does. And our vision is actually that we help all the partners in the ecosystem to realize timber buildings more easily than they do now. So that means that we help architects design timber buildings, we help factories produce timber buildings, and we help contractors to realize buildings from the modules that we have came up with.
And Jurrian, what's your vision for the future of modular timber construction? I mean, how do you see it developing, and where do you see your company within that?
Yeah, actually, we see a big interest. There is actually a story I always like to tell, and that is that, you know, as a startup or a scale-up, you know that you have the right product market fit if people start to call you and be very concrete about, can you help me with this plot, or can you? And that's exactly what's happening at this moment. So we're really happy with it. So I think it's picking up. I don't think it's picking up all over Europe at the same time. So that's also very interesting to see what the differences are. But I think the biggest push will come from the European Union Green Deal now, taxonomy in Europe. And that helps us tremendously because a lot of investors now say to their developers, we need timber buildings. We need to be ready for fund number 9 and all the sustainability goes along with it. So I think that's definitely a big push, and we see that happening now in the market. Also the reporting, people are starting to ask their subcontractors or contractors, how sustainable is your concrete? And that will definitely be a big change, I think, for us.
That's interesting. And as you mentioned, there are different things happening in different parts of Europe. So let's start with the industry landscape in the Netherlands, often seen as a front runner in sustainable construction. How are you seeing it developing?
Yes, I think the Netherlands, compared to some other countries, may have a front runner attitude. My biggest surprise was actually when I started with Finch Buildings. I thought that the private sector would be faster with adopting it than the public sector, and we see the complete opposite. So the public sector has this CO2 regulatory push to go to modular and timber construction. So that is very interesting to see. And that is very big in the Netherlands. So maybe that's good to add that the let's say the more public or semi-public residential investors in the Netherlands are really big housing associations. And that helps for this sustainability push, I would say, within construction. What I also noticed is that the Netherlands has, I think, a lot of experience with modular construction. We already do that for quite some time, and is more and more adopted as a normal way of building. In the beginning, modular construction had this ring to it that it would be temporary or just for a building site shed, let's say, and now you see that everybody is adopting it as a serious method of construction. And that is, I think, what happened in the last 10 years or so. Yeah.
And Jurrian, let's drill down a little bit in terms of the Netherlands. How are things like regulations, building codes influencing the take-up of timber buildings? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that maybe that's also a little bit Dutch. We just start somehow with things. And I see that the regulatory body, as I think is always the case, is a bit behind on schedule. Of course, they need to see what's happening in the market. And I know for sure that there will be a temporary ruling, let's say in the summer of next year, about timber construction in the Netherlands. And there will be a lot of attention to fire safety, acoustics, all those things, because the normal building regs in the Netherlands are, of course, based on concrete. So I think that's something you see broader in Europe. That is difficult to meet with this. The performance is based on concrete and not so much on timber. So you need different kind of regulations for that, and that's happening in the Netherlands more and more. So that's good news, I guess. And what is interesting is that we have in the Netherlands a very strict building code on sustainable impact of the buildings. And what we recently discovered in the Netherlands is that the CO2 emissions are not actually factored in correctly. So, for example, a steel beam in the Netherlands is is actually almost as sustainable as a timber beam. While in reality, the timber beam also absorbs a lot of carbon, and the steel beam emits a lot more CO2, but they get a discount because steel is actually a long-lasting material. That's at least the story that the steel industry has put forward. So that is an interesting thing in those regulatory things. You see a lot of lobbying of existing parties and the new parties trying to fight uphill battles, let's say, on that regard. But that's all changing. Hopefully, we will also get a carbon rule like France already has. That's very interesting. Europe is busy with this carbon regulation in construction, but it's still not completely there. But France already put forward a CO2 regulation in construction, and that is something the Netherlands is looking into to adopt it as well.
It's interesting to get your take on the Netherlands. But Jurrian, how do you see that in terms of the broader European context?
I think that in general, you see that timber is picking up, although I see a lot of differences between different countries in where they are. For example, in Belgium, we see that it's actually like the Netherlands 3-4 years ago in terms of a big focus on energy, not so much focus on materials and the emissions that are going along with it. So that differs per country. I think Germany has always been a very sustainable country, but also a country that is adopting a bit slower, I would say, new innovations. And I see a lot of potential in the Nordics as well. That has a lot of course, a lot of history with timber construction, but not so much the production power to realize all the timber buildings that they want to build. So. That's also for us an interesting market to look at. And of course, the UK as well.
There's a big focus on the European Green Deal objectives and sustainable construction more broadly. Do you see this as a growing focus across Europe? And is it already translating into more interest in terms of what you're doing there at Finch?
Yeah, actually, one of the examples is from France. So there's not only the Green Deal, but also the local regulations. But a big contractor, we were speaking with the first times we spoke with them, let's say 2 years ago, they said, yeah, interesting. And now they said, we want you in tenders this year. So that means that there is a focus on sustainable construction throughout Europe, I would say. But it's also, of course, also as a young company, it's difficult to have the energy on all these different countries. So we will have to probably choose one or two to focus on first.
And politics plays quite a role here. There's a big focus on regulation, both at the European but also national level. And I noticed the Dutch government has targeted a circular economy by 2050. So I guess what role do you see that playing? And how is this influencing your strategy, both in terms of engaging with governments, but also the companies that you're working with?
I think it's vital, to be honest. I think if... what we see from the last 10 years, if the governments are not pushing on regulation, you won't see the market move as fast as if they're forced. And that's a really maybe a bit sad, but also a lot of companies we talk to, they say, we want these regulations because then we get a level playing field. And now we are front runners, but we are not awarded for it or rewarded for it, literally. So they are... Actually, also the politics always say if they're we can't ask this to the market because the market is not ready for it, and the market says please ask me this because then we have a level playing field and everybody has to do it. So I think that is something very important. The politics are really important, but you also see, and Richard, to be frank, I think this summer and last summer shows that we have to do something and sustainability is no longer a nice to have. And that is what I notice also in the political dynamics, that people are aware of the fact that it's really now influencing our life, climate change. And yeah.
You mentioned regulation, creating a level playing field. Are there any specific policies or government initiatives that you think could help remove some of those blocks and challenges, and maybe even actually accelerate the growth of modular timber construction as a sector?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is, and that's a difficult one, but a very important one, I think, is that we are going for true pricing. If we make sure that also the environmental costs and the CO2 costs of the materials are factored in, To give you an example, if you store 1 ton of CO2 in timber, you prevent 1.3 tons of CO2 in other building materials. So if you take those things both into account, then one apartment of our system of 65 square meters, let's say, will store 42,000 euros of carbon and prevent it as well. So that is an enormous amount, and it will change, of course, dramatically the decision making in real estate investors. So they are also asking us, how can we factor in those carbon credits? Because it's now really difficult still to do that. But I think if that would be factored in, maybe with a fund, a governmental fund or European fund, that you can factor in the CO2 faster than literally the market rates, then it goes really fast. And we see that in the Netherlands. So the city of Amsterdam has 480 euros per ton of CO2 in their internal business cases. The province of Utrecht in the Netherlands will take into account 875 euros per ton. That's tremendous. So that is really helping us in the right way. But everybody, all the market parties will ask me, how do I factor that in my business case? Because I'm not a government. So how does it work?
And there's a lot of focus on collaboration and partnership. How important do you see this going forward to reach the goals that are being set? And I guess really help drive this area of timber construction?
What we noticed is that in the beginning, and I think that was also logical, you have to develop a system. You want to do everything yourself because you want to understand everything yourself. So we designed it, we engineered it, we worked together with one production partner who was also the contractor on site. And that gave us a span of control that was very nice in the beginning of a company. But now we notice that if we want to make real impact and really give this big push on construction and have an impact there, then we need to collaborate. And then we need to collaborate from governments to clients, to architects, to factories, and to contractors. And they all have to have an incentive to work with us. And I always try to explain it as there is a big puzzle on the table of timber construction, but there is a part in the middle that is missing. And what we do is we actually poured some resin in the middle and make sure that that was our business model. So everybody has a benefit from working with us, but nobody is threatened by it. And I think that is the new kind of partnerships that we need in construction. We need to do this together because otherwise the challenge is too big.
And Jurrian, obviously there's a lot of other construction methods available. So what would you say to governments and developers who are maybe reluctant to adopt modular timber construction? I guess what are the advantages and why should people be looking more closely at the sector?
That's a good question, actually. And what I always say to people who are hesitant, come take a look. Because I never heard somebody walking into a timber building and saying, I don't like it. Everybody has this natural, I would say, something resonates inside them with timber construction and the fact that it's a more natural way of building. Of course, there are also all the research is there that it also is healthier for you if you live in a timber building, but also people feel it immediately. So that is step one. Come take a look. And we have more than 10 buildings in place already, 857 modules. So we have some experience with that. And on the other hand, I think it's really good to also. Actually, this week I had a very interesting lecture of a Dutch journalist called Kees Klomp. And he said to me in that lecture really, really clearly, everybody understands the value of things. Everybody is always looking at the economic value, but we should look at a broader sense of value. And that means that you have to look at other factors that are important for you. And we are not saying to our children on a Thursday, sorry, the love for this week is gone. It's out. We don't have any love left. No, of course we don't do that. So we all understand what real value is. And I think that is something that a lot of people are worrying about their business case, because that's the only thing that holds people back usually. It's not, we can explain about fire safety, we can explain about acoustics, we can show them the buildings, but it mainly is always about the business case that is, of course, more challenging than regular construction. So you need to look differently. You need to look at the whole scope of the project, not only direct building costs, but also additional costs, building time, interest rates, financing that is lower than traditional construction. To give you an example, if we have to make 129 apartments, we can do that within 1 year from start of construction to realization. And that helps, of course, in getting the whole business case going. And then I'm not even talking about total cost of ownership. So the whole package is important, and try to assess the real value of being on a habitable planet. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, that focus on efficiency, but also that growing conversation around social value. It's going to be really fascinating to see how this sector evolves, because it has the potential to be really influential over the coming years. Thanks very much for joining us, Jurrian.
Thank you very much, Richard. Nice to be here.